The question is, to my mind, and the distinction between Bourdieu and all the Marxists, is the potentiality of recognition. Bourdieu, in his theoretical claims, in his theoretical books, indeed in most of his books, except I would say For the Weight of the World, really thinks that the dominated cannot understand the conditions of their domination. That they only have that sense in Gramsci use of it. And that is the question. I think what all these Marxists share is the possibility that the dominated can understand the conditions of their domination. And that there is a kernel of good sense that can indeed be elaborated. And that is the importance of Bourdieu, to deny the possibility of that self-recognition, self-understanding. Once Bourdieu denies the possibility of the dominated to understand the conditions of their domination, he is left defending intellectuals as the sort of liberators of mankind in this so-called international election. Or he becomes a Hegelian, in which he talks about the ways in which the state becomes the arena of a game whereby we pursue universality. So I think that he is very much worthwhile arguing with, because I think he represents a vision of the dominated that is often at the core of much sociological thinking, though few have the courage that Bourdieu has to actually be explicit about the incompetence of the dominated to understand their lives. So that's what's at stake. So I wanted to I think in the reproduction book which you referred to, yeah, fine, but he there systematically destroys any possibility of any ways in which the dominated, those not in the middle classes, can understand the conditions of their existence. Now, you may agree with him, but I think it's anyway it is a challenge for Marxism. And I think the final point I'd like to make is the one that Peter raises about Bourdieu in a wider context. I mean, I thought it was really, for me, it was really some wonderful experience to try and think about Bourdieu in South African context. In fact, it was rather funny because I'm used to, as you can see, to criticize Bourdieu. So I come to Wits and I start criticizing Bourdieu in the early lectures, and I realize this is not the thing to do because, people will say, well, criticizing, why should we bother to come and listen to you? So, I mean, I then had to sort of switch somewhat to begin to defend Bourdieu. Unfortunately, Carl was there to help me defend Bourdieu. He did a much more effective job than I did. But I think that's what we should do with Bourdieu. We have to put Bourdieu to work in very different contexts. And I think he's incredibly French theorist, and I don't think we've been acknowledging it sufficiently. We know it, but we don't acknowledge it. So in this country, in the United States, everybody loves distinction, but nobody seems to really nobody has really tackled the real profound question is distinction really a model, a way of understanding classes relevant to the United States? You can bring Bourdieu, for example, to post-Soviet Russia. And there's an interesting question about, the conditions. Does distinction apply to the new dominant class in post-Soviet Russia? Or do we have to think a bit more as one student here is arguing, perhaps you have to think a bit more in terms of Veblen, in terms of conspicuous consumption, rather than this refined consumption that Bourdieu talks about. I think that we have a long way to go in trying to bring Bourdieu to different places and in that way reconstruct him. So I agree with you, Peter, that we need to do more of that, and we need to really get a sense of the particularity of Bourdieu and also his generality. Yes, right. Well, I think that you're absolutely right, Peter, about Bourdieu being a materialist at heart. I mean, the Distinction book is a very weird book. Because basically in the book there, he's attacking the idea of classes on paper. And basically classes are the product of classification struggles. And the weird thing about that book is he just takes for granted the class structure. He has three classes: the dominant class, the middle classes, and the working classes. He divides the dominant classes into two, he divides the middle classes, the petty bourgeoisie, into two, but it's so Marxist, it's not true. And then the cultural moment is a sort of gloss on Marxism almost. So I agree with you that Bourdieu is very much materialist. But I think the contribution is not in his analysis of the materialist basis of class, but is in his analysis of symbolic domination. That seems to me his main contribution. And that gets him into a series of paradoxes, I think. Not least, who on earth is he talking to? That's, I suppose, the last question I'd love to repose in that very room you're in. Who is Bourdieu talking to? If the dominated can't understand the conditions of their domination, don't have the equipment to read Bourdieu. And after all, who does have the equipment to read Bourdieu? Then on the one hand, and if dominant classes have no interest in learning about symbolic domination, who is he talking to? And that seems to be a very big question. In practice, towards the end of his life, he was talking to the working classes. But there we see an odd sort of discrepancy between the theory and the practice. He's on the picket line as if the working class can indeed understand and his theories. On the one hand, on the other hand, he said that they can't. And I think that's the final paradox that we have to wrestle with. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you. I want to be very encouraging because there are other people in the room who want to ask many other questions.
Sure.
Carl?
In the book. I think, and of course Peter is right, there's a bit of parody there, and there are certainly Marxists doing interesting things in South Africa. But I think that the argument that I try to put forward in the Johannesburg moment is an argument for a kind of fragmentation, a kind of disruption of reality, a kind of breakdown of the narratives through which we've told our stories from before the democratic transition, through the transition, and into, I don't know what to call South Africa now, and that's the point. That's exactly the point. And so I'm arguing that the narratives that we use, and in this case the narratives of Marxism, close off our ability to see things that are otherwise in front of us. And so for instance, on the question of class, I mean, I certainly don't feel that class is a redundant concept. But if we try and grapple with, if we try and frame, for example, the protests, strike action, xenophobic attacks, and so on, through the categories of class and the narratives of class, I think we lose a whole lot of what's going on, and a whole lot of very real kind of processes of fragmentation that we need another language to be able to grasp, to be able to talk about why class fragments, for example. So it's an invitation, I suppose, to rethink, to think afresh, to challenge the narratives and the paradigms within which we operate, and try and look afresh at things. So I'm struck, for example, the research, the work that I've been doing on violence over the last few years. Well, what's quite striking is that in so much of the research on xenophobic attacks, on community protests, on strikes, violence is a sort of an add-on. It's referred to, it happens, but it doesn't ever become the center of analysis. There are not questions asked about what is the meaning of this violence, why does it happen, why do we tell ourselves that we're such a violent society in South Africa. And so part of the shift is to say, let us look at violence and try and understand that. And I think the same can be said of many other things that are happening in South Africa now. So that, I suppose, is really the invitation in quite a lot of what I write here. On the class formation question, you know, let me go to habitus, because habitus is a really it's a tricky bugger. It's so attractive in so many ways, and what I found particularly, what really opened me up to sort of open my imagination to think about things, is the notion of the way dispositions are embodied, the way habitus is embodied in in the physical, in our physical bodies. So that submission, for example, is a very physical thing. It's not just an idea. It's not just consent in the mind. It's a way